We opened today's homework thinking about things that God could be doing that would also be considered breaking his law, specifically that of work on the Sabbath. What are some possible activities that God might be up to that would be considered work on this sacred day?
Well, I know that babies are born on the Sabbath, people die on the Sabbath, so believing that God is present in both of those situations, that would be considered work on the Sabbath.
And even just sunrise, sunset, the whole activity of holding creation together every moment of the Sabbath seems like work.
It does seem so. And seeing as the law is God's own law, and that it is within his holiness and majesty to apply his law within his creation as he sees fit. The religious Jews could recognize that God had sustaining power in creation, so they had to develop interpretations that would allow them to understand how he could be at work on the Sabbath while not breaking his own law. They had developed strict rules and regulations for the Jewish people to follow, and the Pharisees spent excessive energy upholding the interpretation of those laws, sometimes seemingly with very little mercy and grace, which disregarded the heart of their God, who had revealed himself to be both gracious and merciful.
Yeah.
How does all of this connect to the things that we've been covering in our homework?
Well, Jesus was being persecuted because he healed on the Sabbath, and yet he knew the scriptures. He knew the law better than any of the Jewish rabbis, and yet he healed on this sacred day anyway. So he knew exactly what he was doing. He was doing it to make a point.
And what point was he making?
Well, he's saying, I am Lord of the Sabbath, I'm Lord of creation. He was putting himself on the same level as God. He's saying, I'm equal with God.
So the Jews are less concerned with the miraculous healing and more so enraged by the audacious claims that Jesus is making.
Yeah, and in our homework, we saw how Jesus made numerous authoritative statements indicating that the Father had given him a job to do while he was on earth. He was to be the Messiah, so that whoever believed that he was who he said he was and that he was doing the work of his Father would pass from spiritual death to spiritual life. And he said his Father had given him authority over life and judgment.
In chapter 5, verses 26 and 27, it says, For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to execute judgment because he is the Son of Man. And to these people who would have known their scriptures so well, they knew Jesus was saying that he was the Son of Man from Daniel chapter 7. He was the Messiah.
So this makes the religious elite furious. Here is a carpenter claiming to have authority to pass judgment over them, they who follow the law better than anyone else.
Yeah, but Jesus knows their thoughts just like he knows ours. And so he assures them that his judgment is just because he doesn't seek his own will, he seeks his Father's.
Yeah, Jesus makes it clear that his identity is divine. And he says that there are 5 things that bear witness or testify to who he is. What are they?
Well, the first witness was John the Baptist, and John the Baptist had his own following, but he was still always pointing to someone other than himself. So John the Baptist, and then it was Jesus's own words about himself. There was the signs and the wonders that Jesus was doing, and the testimony of God. God's audible voice was heard by John the Baptist and the crowd at Jesus's baptism. And finally, it was all the scriptures that Jesus was fulfilling.
So the religious elite had been making up rules for the people to follow, saying it was an attempt to honor God. And yet Jesus states that he came to do his Father's will. And he seems to be disregarding the rules all the time while he claims to be fulfilling them. He's calling these people out with some tough truths. What are they?
Well, Jesus tells his listeners that they don't have the word of God abiding in them, because if they did, they would believe Jesus' words. And he says they refuse to come to him and have life. They don't have God's love in them. And they won't even receive Jesus coming in the Father's name.
And he finishes with perhaps the hardest truth of all in verse 44 to 47. He says, "How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and you do not seek the glory that comes from the only God? Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, on whom you have set your hope. For if you believed Moses, you would believe me because he wrote about me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words?"
So what's at the heart of their unbelief?
Well, they'd rather receive glory from others than from God, and they've set their hopes on Moses and the law. And so this is what will pass judgment on them, the fact that they're condemned by their own inability to keep it perfectly. They couldn't see that Jesus was the only one who could perfectly keep the law. And so because of that, he would be the one to pass judgment on them and ultimately on us as well.
Hard words to hear, especially for someone who has devoted their whole life to honoring God by following the rules.
And they would have been such hard words to hear, but they were spoken so that those who heard could be saved. And that is true grace. And I think it's something to remember in our world where grace is so often used as a license to excuse sin or downplay sin. Grace is being willing to speak hard words and hard truths in order to save somebody. And so it's not about rule following, it's about believing that Jesus is who he says he is, that he gives spiritual life, and then coming to him to receive it from him.
Grace upon grace. As we close today, may we be thoughtful about what hard truths we might be wrestling with that keep us from accepting Jesus' authority in our own lives. What are we setting our hopes on? Have we allowed disappointments to shame us, or rather send us running to Christ? Consider these for now, and we'll chat more tomorrow. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.